In the private sector, we have FedEx and we have UPS, two very similar companies that will get your package where it needs to go. In 2002, UPS went all in on their slogan, "What can Brown do for you?" It's not my favorite slogan. FedEx has that nifty little arrow that they hide in the negative space between the E and the X. I only mention those because those are the two things that I immediately associate with each company, but I think we can dig a little deeper with our comparisons. Fred Smith wrote a now famous paper for one of his classes. It proposed some revolutionary new ideas involving transportation and delivering packages. The story that everyone likes to tell here is that his professor gave him a C on the paper and told him that those ideas would never work. Based on statements made by Fred Smith himself, I don't think that's what happened. It appears that those ideas weren't incredibly well thought out, nor was it the central focus of the paper, plus he didn't even remember what grade he got. But that paper did contain some concepts that he would further develop and use in establishing FedEx. I don't want to get too far into what the concepts actually were because, quite honestly, I'm no expert here. But it involved shipping packages on dedicated planes rather than putting them on commercial passenger planes, which was the standard at the time. That way the shipping can be done faster because they can make their own schedule rather than conforming to the one that was already in place by those passenger planes. There was also the idea of shipping everything through one central hub, rather than directly between cities. I don't think it was necessarily cheaper to do it like this, but it was faster, and that was their main concern. To get this thing running, he needed some serious cash. This is a little more involved than starting your typical small business. He needed a fleet of airplanes and trucks and other things. Starting FedEx required hiring 400 employees before they even made a single sale. Luckily, his family was rich. His father started these bus lines years earlier that eventually became part of Greyhound, so he had a $4 million inheritance to put toward it. Which turns out was only a small percentage of what he needed. For the rest of it, he searched for investors, some of them willing to lend him money and some of them willing to buy a percentage of the company. He was able to convince them through outlining his potentially groundbreaking delivery concepts, not to mention he had a pretty solid background for something like this. He had an economics degree from Yale, combined with experience in the Marines as a pilot in Vietnam. He took his $4 million inheritance, combined it with the impressive $90 million he raised from investors, and started FedEx. And things were really bad at first. They reportedly lost almost $30 million in their first 26 months. Can you imagine that? All these investors relying on you, and after 2 years of work, all you've done is lose $30 million. Of course these things take time, but holy cow. A big reason they were having so much trouble was an energy crisis, which started at the worst possible time for them. Fuel prices were through the roof, which obviously negatively affects a young shipping company. It made it next to impossible for them to turn a profit. And I think this demonstrates just how shaky things were. There was a point where they had a $24,000 fuel bill and only $5,000 available to pay it. If they didn't come up with the money, they couldn't continue operating. So in a desperate attempt to raise the money, Fred traveled from Memphis to Chicago to talk to some people about a loan. When he was denied, he became even more desperate and, at the last minute, changed his return flight to Memphis into a flight to Las Vegas. I think you can see where this is headed. He took that $5,000 to the blackjack tables. His mentality was that the $5,000 wasn't enough, so it might as well give it a try. Luckily, he did win enough money that night to pay the fuel bill. It didn't mean the company was saved. It simply meant they can continue delivering packages for the next week. But it got them through their immediate troubles, and it gave them a little confidence boost. So just think about that. The fate of FedEx once relied on some games of blackjack. From there, they turned things around pretty fast. I don't think they would exist today if they didn't. Good. Experience had made them more efficient. They were delivering more packages, and this is the year that the airlines were deregulated, which meant fewer restrictions specifically in the size of their planes, and it just opened the doors so they can grow. This is where things started to take off. You get it? Take off! You can imagine all the different ways businesses can benefit from express shipping, and FedEx were the people to do it. They effectively started that industry and have always been a huge part of it. In 1978, they had a public offering, and this is interesting. By 1983, they reported $1 billion in revenue, the first company to ever do that in its first decade without any mergers or acquisitions. By 1985, they had doubled that to $2 billion. However, this one did include acquisitions. See, they started doing business internationally back in 1980 in Canada, and now we're acquiring companies to get their business established overseas in Europe and Asia. The international business ended up losing money for its first 5 years, and they're International, who is a successful international cargo airline, also with well over $1 billion in revenue each year. All right, they're pretty big at this point. Let's shift over to UPS while pointing out some of the key similarities and differences. First off, they started 64 years earlier in 1907. I'm going to go ahead and say the start was much more modest as well. Remember how FedEx was founded by a wealthy ex-military Yale graduate with $100 million, a fleet of airplanes, and 400 employees? Well, UPS was founded by a 19-year-old with 6 bicycles. His name was Jim Casey, and he would continue to be the leader of UPS for the next 55 years and involved in management until his death. 21 years after that, which is actually a similarity, they were both started by one key person that essentially spent their life with them. Another key difference is UPS started by delivering telegraphs, but the popularity of the telephone reduced the demand for that, so they shifted over to department store deliveries. If you ordered something from the store, they'd offer to have it delivered to you that same day, and it was UPS who made that delivery. But then, by the 1950s, more people had cars and were just driving to the store to get, which lowered the demand for these services, and UPS shifted again. This time into the business that we know them for today, delivering packages for the public. They'd actually started doing this as a side thing in Los Angeles in the 1920s. But now in the 1950s, it became their core focus. So we can add that to the list. FedEx had a clear vision dating back to a college paper years before it even started, whereas UPS took a little time to get there. As far as international growth, they took 2 very similar paths. Started offering services in Canada in 1975 compared to FedEx, who did it in 1980. Then it didn't take long for either one to start focusing on the rest of the world, specifically Europe. They bolted it aggressively through acquisitions, but price wars between the two to try to gain market share over there made it hard for either one to be profitable. FedEx was pioneering in their overnight air delivery service, but then, after less than a decade in the mid-80s, UPS was catching up delivery presence, but I think we can say that FedEx really caused them to step up their game. One of the biggest differences that stands out to me historically between the two is how they've obtained their funding. Traditionally, UPS has been more exclusive and conservative in the way that they raise money. Consider this, before FedEx even started, Fred Smith was off securing loans and looking for buyers. And then, as soon as the company started looking attractive, after only 5 years of operation, they had an IPO on the stock market. Gap 2S. Now, let's delve into another important aspect that has shaped both FedEx and UPS in recent years: technological innovations and sustainability efforts. These two giants have invested heavily in technology to streamline their operations and improve customer experience. FedEx has been a pioneer in adopting advanced tracking systems. Their sensor-aware technology allows customers to monitor their packages in real time, including temperature, humidity, and even light exposure. This has been particularly beneficial for industries like healthcare and electronics, where the condition of the package is just as important as its timely delivery. UPS, on the other hand, has made significant strides with their Orion system, on-road integrated optimization and navigation. This advanced algorithm helps drivers find the most efficient delivery routes, reducing miles driven and fuel consumption. It's a win-win: faster deliveries and a smaller carbon footprint. Speaking of sustainability, both companies have set ambitious goals to reduce their environmental impact. FedEx aims to be carbon neutral by 2040. They've invested in electric and hybrid vehicles, and they're also exploring alternative fuels for their aircraft. UPS is not far behind. They've committed to sourcing 40% of their ground fuel from low-carbon or alternative sources by 2025. Moreover, they've been expanding their use of electric vehicles and have even started testing drones for last-mile deliveries in rural areas. These technological advancements and sustainability efforts not only make these companies more efficient, but also more responsible corporate citizens. They're setting the bar high for the logistics industry, showing that it's possible to be both profitable and environmentally conscious. Gap 2S. And now let's move on to how these companies manage their funding and retail locations. Gap 2S. Beyond technological advancements and sustainability, both FedEx and UPS have focused heavily on improving customer experience and making a positive impact on their communities. These efforts have been crucial in maintaining their competitive edge and fostering customer loyalty. FedEx has always been at the forefront when it comes to customer-centric innovations. Their delivery manager tool allows recipients to customize delivery times, locations, and even request vacation holds, ensuring that packages arrive at the most convenient time for the customer. This level of control has significantly enhanced the overall customer experience, making FedEx a preferred choice for many. UPS, on the other hand, has invested in their My Choice service, which provides similar customization options for deliveries. Additionally, UPS has taken it a step further by integrating their service with smart home devices. Imagine getting a notification on your smart speaker that your package is just 5 minutes away. This seamless integration of technology into daily life has made UPS deliveries more predictable and reliable. But their impact goes beyond just customer convenience. Both companies have been deeply involved in community support and disaster relief efforts. FedEx has a long history of providing aid during natural disasters. Their fleet of aircraft and extensive logistics network enable them to deliver critical supplies quickly to affected areas. Whether it's hurricanes, earthquakes, or wildfires, FedEx has been there to help communities rebuild. UPS is equally committed to community support. The UPS Foundation has been instrumental in providing grants, logistical support, and volunteer hours to various causes around the world. From educational programs to environmental conservation, UPS employees are encouraged to get involved and make a difference. These initiatives not only highlight the company's commitment to social responsibility, but also strengthen their bond with customers and communities. By prioritizing customer experience and community impact, FedEx and UPS have set new standards in the logistics industry, proving that corporate success and social good can go hand in hand. Gap 2S. Now, let's move on to how these companies manage their funding and retail locations. Whereas UPS has typically handled things differently, their IPO wasn't until 1999, after 90 years of operation. Before then, the ownership wasn't offered to the public. In the very beginning, it was owned by the employees, and over the years, the shares were only offered to executives and their families, and a very tight group of people, and the debt too. Historically, UPS has been very hesitant to take out debt, and most of their expansion over the years has been done by using their own earnings. Thing is, UPS has been much more unionized. And what about the retail locations? In 2001, UPS spent $191 million to purchase mailboxes, etc., which was a 4,300 location chain of packing and shipping centers that was soon rebranded as the UPS Store. It was a quick way to have a massive retail presence and make their services more available. Then, in 2003, FedEx answered with a very similar move. They bought Kinko's for over $2 billion, their biggest acquisition ever at the time, and quickly renamed them a couple of times until they were eventually all called FedEx Office. And probably the biggest difference between these two, as far as the public is concerned, is FedEx is known for their air deliveries and UPS is known for their ground deliveries. When you think of UPS, you think of a truck. When you think of FedEx, you think of a plane. We haven't been competing in each other's territories for decades, but if you've seen Castaway, 935 wasn't a UPS plane. That's been the main difference over the years, but I have to say, after comparing some recent figures, these two are becoming more and more like each other. First off, which do you think is bigger? I'm sure you're having a hard time answering that because it's close. UPS is the 41st largest US company and FedEx is number 47. 72 billion in revenue compared to 65 billion. In 2018, UPS delivered almost 21 million packages per day, whereas for FedEx 1005 more like 14 million. I want to look deeper into the revenue sources, but they report their segments a little differently. FedEx separates their express and ground services because they use separate networks, so this was the best I could do to match them up, to provide a more direct comparison. It's not perfect, but I promise. The point comes across. It shows that when it comes to delivering packages in the United States, UPS is the clear winner. On the other end, International 1035 compared to UPS, it's just a higher revenue overall. They've spent over $4 billion acquiring a European delivery company called TNT Express in 2015, and that was their big attempt to further grow their presence over there. When comparing the assets of the two, it's actually a little higher for FedEx. They report that they have more aircraft and ground vehicles than UPS. FedEx has about 56,000 more employees. Here's a big one. 1059 operating income. It's been noticeably higher for UPS, giving them significantly higher operating margins. But I don't know, even after analyzing all these key statistics, I still have to say these two are similar. Here's my overview. UPS was first. They started from next to nothing, but slowly built into something big. FedEx came later, but they combined a lot of money with revolutionary ideas and an aggressive attitude, made for a risky start, but once they found their footing, they were unstoppable. They spent the next 40 to 50 years responding to each other's moves. As a result, we now have two similar-sized companies that still maintain their specialties, but are more like each other today than they've ever been in the past. That's my perception anyway. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of all this? Aside from all the comparisons, we should recognize that these are two very different success stories. A six-man messenger service and a company whose fate may have depended on a hand of blackjack are currently two of the largest companies in existence. Also, I can be here for hours comparing these two, so I did my best in selecting what I thought was the most significant and the most interesting. So if you have anything else to add to the list, feel free. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.